and thank you for calling this hearing and gathering such a strong group of witnesses across a broad array of issues in the general categories of discussion of energy accountability and reform proposals. To me, accountability in energy markets starts with data, arming consumers, industry, policymakers, regulators with the kind of information about our energy systems and markets that help make all of us make smart decisions. This is particularly important at this point in time when our energy systems are in major transition, as was outlined in the quadrennial review by Secretary Moniz. One of the legislative proposals before us today, S. 1420, the Energy Market Act, would boost the Energy Information Agency's ability to collect data on important energy trends and the kinds, both in the physical and financial energy markets. It would establish the Office of Financial Market Analysis at EIA, along with the Interagency Working Group on Energy Markets that would span the Department of Energy and FERC, along with regulators at the Security and Exchange Commission and the Department of Treasury. I bring this up because there are some in the House that would actually roll back important consumer protections. This is particularly concerned because this committee in a bipartisan fashion crafted legislation in response to the Western energy crisis that we were able to implement, and I think it's been good legislation and worked well. But last week, the head of the enforcement at FERC testified that the current proposal pending in the House would hinder the agency's effort to pursue market manipulation cases. Since the committee led the effort to put this in place, a ban on market manipulation in 2005 in the energy bill, FERC has returned almost $1 billion to consumers in the U.S. Treasury for market infractions for unjust profits. So it would seem that some in the House in their proposal is more motivated to help Wall Street banks and their attorneys who have complained that FERC is just being too tough on them. So I find it ironic at the same time that a credit agency is probably headed towards an expiration, and these people support that. They're also now trying to undermine what is the appropriate actions of FERC and energy market regulators to protect consumers from market manipulation. So when we talk about accountability, I hope my colleagues will agree holding industry accountable to just and reasonable rates and free markets free of manipulation is just what the American consumers want us to do. In our role as an authorizing committee, it is also our job to review existing federal programs to assess, as my colleague said, what is working and not working and whether agencies are within their purview and have set the right priorities. Judging by the number of proposals before us today, it seems obvious that prioritizing innovation and investment in the kinds of technologies that will grow our economy is something we should be able to agree on. The American Energy Council, which I think we'll hear about, Mr. Augustine, has suggested we ought to triple our current annual investment in energy-related research and technology. That's because today the federal commitment to energy R&D is less than 0.5% of what consumers in this nation spend in energy costs. It's because U.S. R&D needs to keep pace with the investment that will take us to help diversify our energy sources in the future. Yeah, we will hear from Mr. Augustine about China is expected to surpass us in the next 5 years in research and development, and now the United States ranks 29th among developing nations with federal R&D. So I hope if we're holding ourselves accountable, we will look at how we compete. The House recently passed a version of the America Competes Act that would actually cut ARPA-E funding research in half. So I don't think that's how we compete, and in fact, one of my constituents, Bill Gates, and the CEO of Cummings Engineering led a charge 2 or 3 years ago to say that ARPA-E should actually be increased in a significant way if we're going to usher in the innovation and job growth that's going to come from helping us on various aspects of energy on a global basis. So the Department of Energy needs to make sure that we are collaborating on a variety of issues with ARPA-E, and it seems to me that my colleagues in the House seem intent in rolling back the clock. We had one of a top scientific advisor for President Roosevelt when launching the Manhattan Project said, quote, "Advances in science when put to practical use mean more jobs, higher wages, and shorter hours." But to achieve these objectives, we need to secure and maintain our position in scientific knowledge, and that must be both continuous and substantial, end quote. I couldn't agree more, and so we have one of our witnesses here today from the Northwest Commissioner Colleen McAleer from Port Angeles, and the commissioner and her colleagues are working on innovation in composite materials that help improve fuel efficiency, whether you're talking about aerospace or you're talking about automobiles, and that market is expected to grow to $26 billion next year. So the Department of Energy's Advanced Manufacturing Office and its laboratories who work with economic development and translate their scientific capabilities into real-world values is something I think that we need to talk about today in helping us move our energy efforts forward. And it is also important and very timely that we talk about our investment in cybersecurity. Last week, we discovered over 4 million federal employees' personal files were hacked. The breach only underscores the persistent and constant threat evolving from cyber, and so it's very important that we talk this morning about that particular issue as it relates to the grid, because it is a target. The Department of Energy has an underappreciated role in assessing this threat and has piloted ways to engage the industry and technology information sharing on the security supply chain, so I hope that we'll be able to talk about R&D and efforts for enhanced grid security on today's agenda. So again, thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank the witnesses for being here today to talk about this very, very broad subject area that we have before us.